The White Australia policy was an ideology of stopping the immigrants from coming to Australia. They did this because they wanted to preserve their English Anglo settlement and to build a larger Australia that was modelled on its English heritage. Although this policy officially started in 1901, there was records of limits of Chinese immigration after the gold diggers started to become violent. This became a policy of Australia in 1901 during Federation. They made sure that if you weren't fair-skinned, you were forced to take a dictation test. You either had to write and read 50 words to enter Australia. On the turn of Federation, the legislators were all Anglo-Saxon and descendants from the UK. Therefore, they wanted to build a new nation modelled on their mother country, Great Britain. Their ignorance from the Australian government was they believed they were superior to other races and cultures, and they couldn't learn anything from the other cultures. They believed that if they let non-whites into Australia, they would eventually take over the world. They believed to have an equal democratic Australia, they must exclude non-whites from immigrating to Australia. They were persecuting all people who weren't white. This included deporting the sugarcane workers and letting the Chinese culture die out after the gold mining. The white Australians saw coloured people as inferior and they weren't as well educated. They were seen as dirty and lower class humans. They saw Aboriginals in particular as bad parents and as animals with no kind of society or law. They could not be a part of the working white Australia as they did not fit in with the model Australia. They didn't have the same qualities or lifestyle as the British. In one of Edmund Barton's speeches, he said, "We have room for but one language here, and that is the English language." This was part of his Australia Day speech in 1907. They were prejudiced by not allowing non-white people by having laws written to try and make it hard for people to migrate. They did not allow them to use certain public facilities. Some were not allowed to enter restaurants or shops because of their race. The hardest law was in visas. Those who were already settlers in Australia, such as the Chinese miners, often had families back in their home country. If you and your family were split up over two countries, you weren't permitted to bring them to Australia. Many families were split because of the White Australia policy. If you did try to get a visa for your family, it would be denied by the dictation test or even not being granted for a dictation test. Before the White Australia policy, the government went and tricked the South Sea Islanders into coming into Australia to work in the sugarcane fields. Once the White Australia policy came into play, they were all deported out of Australia. They were forced to leave their family and friends. The Australian government wouldn't let anyone who wasn't white into their country. They made them all sit a dictation test. They had to sit down in a room where 50 words were read and they had to write it down. It could be in any European language. If they didn't pass, they would be refused entry, and if they did pass, they could retest them. This meant it was near impossible to pass. It wasn't until 1966 before the Aboriginals were recognised as Australian citizens in their own country.